So this video is going to focus on fonts in CSS. And obviously having fonts and picking fonts for a web page is really important. But we're also going to cover a lot of other properties that are related to fonts and to text. And those are font family, font size, font weight, line height, text align, and text decoration. So in this video, we're going to stop and cover all of those. And the first thing we're going to do is get our simple text up that we're going to style. So I have a simple fonts.html file, and I'm going to go ahead and add in some HTML. So I'm just going to do an H1 so that we can see a header and style that, and then some paragraphs. So I'm just going to call this fonts demo page. And then the next thing, rather than just typing some random words or some gibberish like this, which actually doesn't really reflect what the English language looks like on a page, I'm going to use a lorem ipsum generator. So for those of you who don't know, lorem ipsum generators are used to generate a bunch of random text that is English words. It doesn't mean anything at all, but it at least looks like real words. So it is placeholder text. So I have a kind of funny article open of 10 of the best or the most hilarious lorem ipsum generators for web designers. And I'm just going to go with this first one, bacon ipsum. So I'm going to generate a few paragraphs here. Click give me bacon, and you can see it just gives me some text, but this is real text that actually looks like a potential, something you would have on a website. It doesn't look like just gibberish like this. So it's a better representation of a font. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. I'm going to make 2 paragraphs out of this. All right, and we'll leave it at that for now. And we'll come back and add a little bit later, but let's just open this up and see what we have. Okay, so here's the site that we're going to be styling. And the first thing that we want to do is talk about how do we actually just assign a font to anything. And before we can even do that, we have to talk about what fonts we even have available to us in the browser. So there's no easy answer as to which fonts a computer has available in the browser. And that's because they're different on every machine. And I have this site open here, CSS Font Stack, that actually shows, depending on if you're on a Mac or a Windows, what the percentage of those machines are that have a given font. And so these are just kind of the standard web fonts that we'll see a lot of the time. So if we look at one like Helvetica, you can see that every Mac has Helvetica, but very few Windows have Helvetica installed. And so these are the system fonts that come on a machine. So these are not the only fonts that you can use, but these are some that are safer bets. So if you wanted one that you knew for sure would work on every machine, you would pick like Arial Black or Arial. Obviously these fonts though are pretty limited. So we're going to see how we actually include custom fonts later in this video, but for now, let's just pick one of these. So let's go with Arial, sure, Arial. So to use that, we're going to assign that to our paragraphs here. So I'm going to go into my CSS, which I have linked here, styles.css, and the property is called font family. So I'm going to select paragraphs, and I'm going to say font family is Arial, just like that. And if I refresh, you'll see I now have Arial font here. One quick note, I can also put quotes around this, which is totally valid. Sometimes you'll have to do this if you have a font that has a number at the beginning. Not that this is a real font, but if that was, I would have to put quotes around it because this is not a valid CSS line. Okay, so I can give it Arial like that, and you can see we get Arial. So there are other fonts we can play around with. Let's try Georgia. So let's give our H1 Georgia. Just like that. Refresh, and you can see it changes font. So don't despair if you're a designer. We're going to see how to use a lot more fonts and how to include custom ones. But for now, we're just going to focus on the built-in system default fonts, which are a little bit limited. And even then, there's no guarantee. As you can see, there's not any that 100% of machines have. So the next property I want to talk about is font size. So font size does what it sounds like. It controls how big the font is or how small the font is of a given element. So we can select something, and let's do it to our H1, and let's make our H1 a lot bigger. So we do font size, and there are different units that we can use. And the first one is called pixels, or px, and we've seen it a little bit before with border. So we're gonna just give it something huge like 200 px. And if we go back to the browser, you can see we get this gigantic font, 200 pixels. What we can do, just in case if you want to play around with font sizes, you're not sure how big you want this to be, we can inspect it. And then we can go over here and we can click on this and we can change this number. So we can change it to 100 or 60 or 85 or whatever we want, and we can play around in the browser and just see it, the change reflected immediately. So that's a really nice feature when you're playing around with font sizes. So as I mentioned though, this is not the only way of picking a font size. It's not the only unit. There's another popular unit called EMs. And EM is basically a relative font size. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the font size MDN page and go to the EM section. And I'm going to read from here for just a moment. The size of an EM value is dynamic. An EM is equal to the size of the font that applies to the parent of the element in question. So what that really means is, I'm going to show you a quick example. If I put, let's go inside of here under strip stake, I'm going to put a span element. And all that a span does, this is probably our first time seeing them, is it's just a way to group text together without actually making a difference visually. So it's just a way to kind of make an element around the word strip stake, but if I refresh, nothing changes at all. Well, aside from the font size, but nothing changes down here where I have the span. So it's a way to highlight or to single out some line and then do something to it. And we're just going to make it a lot bigger. So we use an EM, or we use the EM units, and if we wanted to make this double the size of the font of this paragraph, we just go into here, select span, and then we just say font size 2.0 EM. And so that is going to be double the font size of the enclosing element, or the parent element, which is this paragraph. So you'll see that here. If I refresh, this span is double the font size of this, but we didn't actually explicitly tell it how many pixels to make it. It just knew how big this was, and then it doubled it. So this is dynamic, which is why a lot of people like it, is that if for some reason I needed to change the font size of this would automatically change. So let me show you another example. Let's increase the font size of paragraphs. Font size, and let's make them 40 pixels. And you can see that this still stays double. So then the one question about EM that comes up a lot is, what is the initial value of EM? What is the top level? Because we can't just keep inheriting from a parent and a parent. There has to be some source of truth. There has to be like the very top level element that actually has a font size. And that actually changes depending on the browser, which is a little bit frustrating. But according to MDN, it's usually about 16 pixels. So that's no guarantee, but it's usually around 16 pixels. So what most people will do is set a font size on the body at the very beginning. So something like this. Body, font size, and let's do something really small to start, like 10 pixels. And then let's change our H1 so that it's 5 times larger than the body. So that's going to look like 5.0 EM. And then we want our paragraph to be twice as large as the body, so 2.0 EM. And then lastly, we want our span to be twice as large as the paragraph, so that's also 2.0, because remember, it's nested inside. So let's do some text outside of a paragraph, just like that. And you'll see it's pretty small. And then we made this 5 times larger than this. We made this twice as large, and then this is twice as large as the paragraph.